program, because as we all know, we can talk about telehealth and telemedicine and getting our citizens access to quality healthcare, but it's really difficult when they cannot connect, when they don't have that quality experience to be able to do video, to upload documents. And in many cases, those dropped calls are also that a significant challenge in itself. So Dean, thank you for the intro. Again, my name is Tim Arbeiter with the Missouri Department of Economic Development, with support through the Missouri Department of Agriculture. Broadband is one of those infrastructure priorities of Governor Parson, and we certainly have been charging ahead in these last few years as it's related to getting better broadband access for our citizens. So let me go through a few slides, and then at a certain point, I'll stop and maybe field a few questions, and then we'll keep going. So just wanted to give a little bit of a primer of some of the numbers that are going on here. Missouri, we stand in the 34th position. That is not a strong position. We understand that and know that, and we got to get better. But we are making strides. We're going up in the rankings, but we certainly need to get better at it. Right now, there is actually a national index that measures broadband access from an infrastructure standpoint, and also the socioeconomic factors that inhibit someone from adopting broadband. So that's actually research done out of Purdue University. There's a national leading broadband researcher there. And in his efforts, he's created this index score, placing Missouri at 55. So let me give you context on that. The closer you are to 100, the bigger your divide is. So we're right in the middle. Missouri, we're always good about being right in the middle. So we need to get better in that aspect of increasing infrastructure, but also thinking of ways on how to maybe break down those barriers that are socioeconomic factors that prevent people from adopting broadband. And then the last two numbers that you see on the screen here is based on the latest data set from the FCC. And what I will also tell you too, these are probably very conservative numbers. The definitions and the way the FCC collects this information is at the census block level. And as we know, in our rural communities, our rural census blocks are fairly large in nature, and it could just take one or a couple households to deem a whole census block served. But I'll share that later in an image to show you what's going on. Here's some additional information and data points that are helpful, just to kind of give an understanding of the complexities and the dire straits that we are in as we're facing with the pandemic itself. During the height of the pandemic, almost 25% of Missouri students couldn't get access. And that was through a rapid survey format through DESE and reaching out to all of the school districts statewide. So we have a rural aspect to this, a suburban and an urban, but really 258 school districts throughout the state. And mind you, Missouri has like 500 and plus school districts, but 250 of those said lack of access. The infrastructure access is the primary reason why students couldn't hook on. But the things are changing for the better. It's a slow process, unfortunately, because we're dealing with infrastructure here. But right now, $824 million is currently being invested through state and federal programs statewide. So these are actual awards that have been made, and each of these have different timeframes associated. And that's what this next slide is. Again, it's very colorful, and I do apologize that you may have to squint a little bit to kind of see the impact here, but there's a lot of colors going on here. And so let me give a little bit of context. The yellow areas are USDA-related programs, and I bring that program up because I also know USDA has telemedicine and distance learning programs, and many of them are can qualify for healthcare facilities throughout Missouri. So those are the yellow areas that have been awarded to providers to build out high-speed internet in Missouri. The purple areas are just starting to be approved by the Federal Communications Commission, and that's called the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. About a week and a half ago, Missouri's first two providers received their approvals, and more should be coming. So those are not fully executed yet, but the announcements are coming out, and they usually, once they start rolling, it's almost on a weekly basis they approve new providers. And I watch that closely just to see which providers in the state have received their approvals to move forward. And then the little orange and blue areas, those are the state funded areas. So we've hosted a couple rounds, and I have a couple slides a little bit later to show that. But before that, I want to talk a little bit about what happened in the CARES process. We're heading into our final months of the CARES funding, but during the height of the pandemic, actually in July of 2020, $50 million was made available by Governor Parson through the Coronavirus Response and Relief Fund. And so the challenge was between July of 2020 and December of 2020 to get the money on the street, to get the money out the door, to support a number of different entities. And so just in telehealth, telemedicine had a core function in several of these programs. And as you can see, 22.5 million was able to get on the street. Again, about a little under half of the funding that was made available. Primary constraints, time frame, and a lot of the requirements that CARES put in place for many of the recipients was certainly a challenge that we face, and not what we're seeing in the ARPA discussion, which we'll tap on in a little bit. So I wanted to just touch on a few of these that actually have impact in the healthcare world. In the CARES process, 800,000 went to 39 libraries, and those are rural, suburban, and urban library districts that were able to apply for these funds to do distance learning for students in higher education in low connectivity areas, but also for those citizens of and patrons of the library that needed access to telehealth or telemedicine strategies. So they could do a number of different things: device checkouts, hotspots, get Wi-Fi outside of their library buildings, and then increase the bandwidth of the libraries. This particular program was actually, during this time frame, the third grant opportunity made available to the library systems. So again, that number was lower than what we had anticipated, but it certainly had high impact for what was funded. As Dean probably well knows, through the Missouri Telehealth Network, and many of you out there may have been recipients of these hotspots, but we were able to get just over 10,000 hotspots to 38 clinics throughout the state. I won't, chat too much about it because many of you probably partook of this program, and if not, it's certainly that we want to keep our eyes on for future programming that comes down the road. K-12 took advantage of $7 million to get Wi-Fi outside of school buildings. Again, we know that wasn't a long-term strategy. That was a short-term, how can we get internet outside of the school buildings, to which that many of them have very strong internet capabilities. How can we capitalize on it and get it outside of their building structures? A little over $8 million went to universities to help with device checkouts, hotspots, online learning management systems. And then finally, we were able to fund 26 infrastructure-related projects, actually getting the internet into homes, about 2.4 million to those projects, connecting 2,500 households. 80% of those projects actually deployed gigabit level service. And I know you're probably shaking your head right now. That doesn't seem like a lot, Tim, and you're exactly right. That time frame between July and December for those providers to get the infrastructure actually constructed and get the homes connected was an extreme barrier that many of them could not overcome. Well, right at April of 2020, so this is before the CARES process. This is a few months before then, but little did we know in April of 2020, we would be in the beginning weeks of the pandemic itself, where we actually awarded 16 infrastructure grants to Missouri broadband providers, just a little over $3 million, connecting just under 7,000 households for a total of investment of just under $21 million in broadband deployment. Almost 80% of those projects were doing gigabit service in very rural portions of the state. And so, just put those numbers in comparison: 21 million for 7,000 homes. So we're talking about an infrastructure here. As we look at superior high-speed internet, it is not cheap to do it. It is very expensive. Matter of fact, I think the average cost per passing per home was in the neighborhood of $2,700 per home. We'll multiply that out by the number of homes that need to get covered, and those numbers grow exponentially. So a couple things. So what I had just shared is where we've been, and now where are we going? And so because I think the big question I get is, when is internet going to get on my home? I need it now. I actually got 3 emails today from citizens saying, I'm in need. Why can't I get it? Can you give me more information? And so that's partly one of my jobs. But right now, what we're also doing is trying to look forward to on how can we work to empower our communities, our counties, our regions to be more active in this space, and many are. There are many regions, many counties in Missouri that are really already down the road and really just are doing great things. And so one of the things that we are working on through the Missouri Association Councils of Government, this is the statewide association for the regional planning commissions in Missouri. And so if any of you are engaged with your regional planning commission, whether you've written a grant with them before or you've attended a county commission meeting at their facility, but we're partnering with their state association on how we might be able to leverage a federal grant through the Economic Development Administration in support with some funds that we hope to secure through the Community Development Block Grant Program on to do feasibility and engineering, preliminary engineering designs for up to 24 counties most impacted by the COVID crisis. And so we are literally just, I would say, not too far off from hopefully hearing good news from both the EDA and the CDBG on our grant requests, because this would fund this $1.2 million initiative to help our counties get that real understanding of what it's going to take to build broadband in their counties. But we had some legislation pass to help get broadband in the mix. But one of the big things that also got some traction this past year are some mapping and speed test initiatives in Missouri. And so Missouri participates in the U.S. Department of Commerce mapping initiative called the National Broadband Availability Map. So we do participate in that, and I have access to that map to get all the data sets that I can get my hands on. But as well, they made a public-facing map just within the last month to allow consumers, organizations, entities like yourselves see the indicators of broadband need in your own community or in your own county. And what I will do in follow up of this, I will make these slides available, which has these hyperlinks. So again, trying to make it easy for you so you're not writing down a bunch of notes, but I want to provide you some hyperlinks to get you to these sources so you can look at your community or your area of your county or even your region that you serve to see what these maps are saying about your area. We also, the University of Missouri system has a speed testing tool where citizens can actually do a speed test through a platform called Ookla. And that data set actually eventually makes its way into the point number 1, which is the National Broadband Availability Map. So again, MU has it. It's mobroadband.org is the MU site. They have a ton of other resources for broadband and community planning efforts. And we work jointly together on how do we strategize with communities, counties, and regions to tackle broadband development in their areas. And then finally, if you're one of an entity from Southeast or South Central Missouri, there's another speed testing initiative sponsored through the Delta Regional Authority. And that is an aspect that I also received that data. And all of these data points really help provide a little bit more of a truer picture of what's going on in Missouri. And the reason why I say that is, let me show you the next map. And this is going to frustrate you. So hopefully nobody hops off because, you might look at your county and say that's not possible. Let me give some context to some colors here. So it's like a stoplight: red, yellow, green. Red is the extremely unserved. They have no internet up to just a 10.1, which is a little bit. Underserved is yellow, which is just above 10.1, but not quite 25.3. And then green by FCC definitions is considered served, which has received high-speed internet of 25.3 or above. And so in many cases, what you're probably looking in your region right now, your county or the entire county may be deemed served. Well, that's not possible, Tim. How can that be? Well, back to my original comments about the various things that are occurring in Missouri at the FCC level, they report by the census block. And so because of that, it really tags a whole census block as served, which really doesn't paint an accurate picture. And that's why those speed testing initiatives that I mentioned on slide number 9 are so critical, because while speed testing is not perfect, it certainly does provide a little bit more of a better picture of what's going on in a home or a business or on your cell phone than what's currently being picked. Forgive me, I'm losing the word. Realized on a map just like this. And so with that, I mean, we're making pretty good time. So I'd like to maybe pause before I start into the next wave of the presentation, which is about all of these federal waves of resources and what it means for broadband. So I'd like to pause. If I can go either way. If you want to put it in the chat or you want to come off unmute, I'm happy to answer questions at this point in time, and then we can go back to the presentation. Well, in the chat, I'm going to go ahead and put in a couple web links for you, just so you can kind of get those on your screen and get them bookmarked, because I know this is a dire need for a lot of areas in Missouri. So let me go ahead and shift to the next phase. Oh, we got, is satellite included in this? No, it is not. Missouri does not include satellite in its assessment of these areas. And so it is what the two major things that are assessed in coming up with this map is what's called wireline, which is think of cable, think of fiber, DSL, or fixed wireless, which is point to point. There's actually a tower. It carries over the immediate area, but satellite is not considered in these definitions. The question is, has there been a notable increase / interest in initiatives to expand broadband since the pandemic? Yes, absolutely. Not only from the multiple agencies that I interact with, but also from the partner organizations that hear from their consumers, their members, if you will. And then also, it really just becomes a heightened level of the number of arenas that this actually transcends. So think, just again, very basic, but think of all the things that healthcare does in the technology space, the distance learning, the remote work scenario, as well as the entrepreneurs and the commerce and the things that needed to transition to the digital space during the pandemic. So broadband was certainly important before the pandemic. During the pandemic, it became critical. It became essential that we get this figured out. So Melissa, you got your hand up.
Yeah, so because this map it always confuses me every time I look at it. So is this meaning that there is wire there, like active wire, or it's just there is the capacity to have broadband?
Okay, so it's two things. So there is either wireline or a fixed wireless carrier within that census block who is providing service currently within the census block. And so somewhere there's a provider reporting that they're providing service. And so let me give you in a context what that means. So the areas in green, if a provider were to apply for a state grant program, on its surface, state grant funds cannot go in those green areas. However, we provide an opportunity for the provider to say the map is incorrect and this is why. So they have to submit evidence to show that the maps are overstated. That's the technical term in broadband space. And so while it's not a hard and fast no, it is show us what's really going on the ground in order to allow state resources to go into these served areas. And that has occurred. We've done that a couple times because the provider really did a good job providing a really good what's happening on the ground kind of thing. Okay, so let's see no more questions in the chat. What I'd like to do is to shift to the waves. There's several different waves of resources that we're watching closely at the state level, but then also as we look at future things related to broadband expansion. So first slide I'm going to share is related to the Supplemental Appropriations Act of 2021. So this is actually related to the coronavirus response and relief supplemental appropriations that was signed by President Trump on December 27th. So this is the first wave. So I shouldn't say first wave. CARES was first wave. So this is second wave. So this is actually has several different programs inside of it, and they're currently active right now. And so the first one being the Federal Communications Emergency Broadband Benefit Program. This is for areas that have infrastructure. And so if you have a carrier that's really been doing hookups in your space, this is actually a program. It's affordability program for those that can't afford it. It is currently active. It is currently seeking enrollments, and we do have a website. It's called ded.mo.gov/getconnected. It is a website that shares all the broadband providers in Missouri that are accepting this program or utilizing this program through the FCC. And I have a slide on that in just a little bit. The second slide is the NTIA Infrastructure Grant Program. So this is actually to build high-speed internet in areas of Missouri that do not have it. And so literally the application deadline, today we stand at August 18th. It was yesterday. So the Missouri had to get our application in. We put a call out for proposals. We got a grant requests totaling over $104 million from providers, and we had to select some providers to submit into Missouri's application based on an evaluation and ranking process of the areas of the highest and most need. And we submitted that yesterday. So it's in NTIA's hands now, and that's the National Telecommunications Information Administration, NTIA, because it's very hard to say that. I just use the acronym. Submitted it yesterday. They will open up a process what they call a challenge process later on this summer or early fall. But we won't know the outcome of that until November. So the applicants that we put in, or the providers that we put into the Missouri's application, we won't know those results until November. But once they are awarded, NTIA fully expects these providers to start construction. And so more to come in this space. But that we have applied for this program. The third program, this is primarily for our communities that actually have what's called a minority serving institution. That's historically Black colleges and universities, and those universities with high concentrations of minority populations. And so both institutions, probably off the top of your head, you can probably think of a couple, Lincoln University and Harris Stowe in St. Louis. Both are very interested in this program. This application deadline is in December 1st, and both are fully expected to apply for this. But this is going to help with institutional connectivity, student connectivity, and also do some community connectivity outreaches. But it's up to the institution what they want to apply for. But this notice of funding opportunity actually dropped on August 3rd, but that application deadline is December 1st. So again, a different type of program, and we're watching that intently. So my next slide actually has to do with the affordability program. So again, mind you, if your area really struggles with no or little connectivity, this is not a program available right now. It's for those areas that do have infrastructure. Again, ded.mo.gov/getconnected is the website, and it has a list of all the current providers participating in this. So even if you're not sure, certainly click on it. There might be a provider in your area that you're unaware of that is providing access to this affordability program. This is actually through the Federal Communications Commission. This was a $3.2 billion affordability program for the internet. And this is the first of its kind that the FCC has done. They have always done an affordability program for telephone, but they have not ever done one on internet. So this is up to $50 a month. Again, you could probably think of the qualifying populations that would qualify this under Coronavirus Response and Relief Act. But that website that I listed also lists the eligible households. So if your area does have infrastructure access and you have populations that struggle, this could be a program that they could get up to $50 a month in support. So right now we have just a hair over 70,000 households in Missouri have signed up for this program. And the money the program stays open until the money runs dry. There is an effort afoot in Congress through the infrastructure bill. It has passed the Senate and headed into the House, but there is a feature in there to repopulate this fund and make it permanent. So it's still a ways off from that decision, but just wanted to kind of give that a little bit of a primer as well. And then finally, before we head into my final two slides, which will carry us a good ways in because there's a lot of questions relying on this. So this is the American Rescue Plan. And this is really targeted just to broadband. But as we all know, the rescue plan can do a number of different things. So it can do coronavirus response, it can do coronavirus recovery, and then the coronavirus relief and resiliency for the future. But it also has aspects or eligible activities, I like to say, of water, sewer, broadband. And so those are things that are also kind of tucked into the American Rescue Plan as activities that can be undertaken through the resources provided to the states, the counties, and the communities who have received a direct allocation. And so right now, this is three different buckets that are happening under ARPA. The first one is the state's allocation. Again, broadband is an eligible activity underneath there. One thing we are working on right now with the leadership teams of all the agencies and with the governor's office is what does that look like and what can be done with broadband with the state recovery fund. And so those conversations are afoot. We have to put together our framework, but then we need to go back to the legislature in late winter to get the spending authority to do this. So more information in this arena, but I also tell you too that in broadband space, the U.S. Treasury in its guidance on use of this fund for broadband, it gives a strict guidance that any projects funded from a broadband standpoint needs to provide superior internet service. And they define that as 100 megabits down and 100 megabits up. And that is probably, in most cases, a fiber connection. And so they are literally wanting states and counties and communities to look at projects that are doing that high level of broadband. But for those that can't meet that 100 by 100, we could do that 100 by 20. So 100 megabits down, 20 megabits up or above or somewhere in between. So they're wanting states, counties, communities, if they choose to use ARPA allocations for broadband, to making sure that they're making high quality investments for that. There's interim guidance out on this from the U.S. Treasury and FAQs that are also available, but they're not final yet. And so we're waiting patiently for that to be finalized. And if any additional FAQs are coming out related to not just broadband, but all of the ARPA related stuff, we hope that gets firmed up pretty soon, but we will see. The second fund that has the possibility for remote access or broadband connectivity is the Coronavirus Capital Projects Fund, and each state receives an allocation on that. So there has been no guidance issued on this, no FAQs. So we're eagerly awaiting that guidance from the U.S. Treasury on how do they interpret what Congress had put into the plan or the act to do this fund. And then last, but certainly not least, the FCC through ARPA expanded the E-rate program. And so this is a program that schools and libraries are able to leverage, but it provided a home connectivity option to assist families and those of need with home connectivity. The unfortunate thing is on round one, they opened it only for 45 days. And so schools and libraries only had 45 days. They may have had a little bit longer because they dropped the rules and said the window is going to open on X date and close on August 13th. But round one has closed. Nationally and in Missouri, hearing that a number of schools and libraries have not applied for this yet due to the time constraints and understanding all the ins and outs to the program. So with that, it is understood that the FCC is going to open up a round two for this $7.2 billion fund. And so we're eagerly awaiting that for schools and libraries to understand a little bit more in that space. And my last thing I would talk about too, as it relates to healthcare, is there are a number of different programs through the USDA. FCC has a couple, but I also know from a state's perspective, we want to keep that top of mind to our conversations as we look to the future, as we look to future funding resources, ensuring that we keep this in the space because telemedicine, telehealth is critical, especially as we look at our rural settings. To be able to do that in more of a telehealth or telemedicine fashion to assist our citizens who maybe have to travel far distances, this certainly would be an add value in that endeavor as well. My final slide has to deal with you. Many of your organizations are highly involved already in your community, and you may think to yourself, Tim, I don't need another project like I'm needing a hole in the head. I'm extremely busy. I'm overtaxed in many ways, and I'm right there with you. But I would say if this is a passion of yours, and one of the reasons why I think you're in this breakout session is to learn more, I also issued the challenge to you, to your staff, or to your partner organizations that you work closely with. I would begin to educate yourself, become aware of your surrounding community. If you're the leader, strategize with yourself or with your board. But if you're not the leader, strategize with your leadership and gain that buy-in to say, in order for us to advance our outcomes or our health goals for our citizens, we need to become more active in this local broadband strategy in order for us to get an understanding what's going on locally, what's not going on, how can we motivate and get some key players? And that would be the other thing. Many of you are engaged with community, local, county, regional groups, and you could probably, get an idea of who those change agents are in your immediate area. These are the people that get things done. You don't know how they do it, but they get it done. But a great start would be to reach out to University of Missouri Extension Office or your regional planning commission. Both of these organizational structures have made broadband one of their key things that they want to work on. So you'll have a friend in your extension office. Your RPC may have broadband as a top priority, and they may have some staff already working on it, and they would gladly accept new hands at the table. But understanding the current situation and the next steps is really all about all the various things that we normally do in our daily jobs. What is the complexity surrounding it? What's going on? What's not going on? And then what can I do to help advance the conversation? And then set the second meeting from the time that you get your change agents together to your second meeting. And there already may be something afoot. And so, again, I don't have everything at my fingertips right now, but if there's certainly a contact that you need, an introduction that you want to have happen, but you yourself, you're the one that can say, I got this. And I would challenge you as we head into maybe our final few minutes together before we head into questions is I'd ask you to take a sticky note or to take a piece of paper and off the top of your head, who are those change agents? List 3 to 5 names of people that you know off the top of your head, maybe a phone call or two, and you can quickly get something together. Or who your RPC member, staffer is, or your extension person, and to make the phone call and say, hey, is there a conversation afoot that I need to be a part of? Or can I help get a conversation going? And so just know that you're not in it alone. It's going to take a team effort. And I am also here as the state broadband director. I do what I can to engage as much and as often as I can at the local level or at the county level. But in many cases, a lot of folks use me to say, okay, what's the next funding program? How can I get myself schooled up on it? How can I attract a provider when there's no provider to be found? And so those are the things that I work on behind the scenes, if you will. And then finally, here is my contact information. I'm just going to leave this up so you can grab my phone number and my email. Again, many times I'm stuck in meetings, so I also text. So happy to respond to text if you are while we're in meetings, because again, I know some of this stuff is real time and you need answers, or you need a website link or a contact name. We want to make sure that we're a resource to you. But I would encourage you to poke around. If this is a passion of yours, poke around on my website. I'd also encourage you to poke around on mobroadband.org, which is the University of Missouri's broadband resource. Again, a wealth of information is on there. Maybe one highlight I would give to my website is towards the bottom, there's a PDF of all of the Missouri broadband providers and key contacts that I have. And so I just make it accessible. If you want to download that list and see if you recognize some of the providers in your area, at least you can have a key contact, because that's really, one of the things that we want to make sure that people get connected really fast with the provider community. And so I'm just going to leave this up here. I see a couple questions have come in on the chat, so I'm going to